The recording has started.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Hold just a moment. Yes, good evening, everyone. Sorry about that delay. Welcome to tonight's Fireside Chat with Lynn and Larouche for Thursday, February 4th. And what we want to do, we're going to be speaking tonight about the Earth's next 50 years, and the speaker will be Jerry Rose. I want to get us started by talking about the way in which this topic represents an urgent discussion tonight among those of us who are now embarked upon a process of trying to make a new compact, if you will, in America among the citizens for the purpose of the survival of the United States. Clearly, the Republican and Democratic parties have both failed the people of this nation. But the reason that failure has occurred is not a matter of partisanship or party politics or issues or identity politics or any of those things. Those things are all symptoms of a disease in which we see a form of Malthusianism, a sort of self-inflicted process of decay. But where that itself comes from is the thing to be investigated. Certainly the American Constitution and the practice of the American presidency are not that. And so the question is, why is it that we have found our nation in the shape that it is in? To lay that at the feet of the mere the destruction of the electoral process, as we saw that occurred during the period, really all of 2020, and specifically from November 3rd until January 20th, is correct, but there's something behind what occurred. So let's take a look for a moment at what we see as the strategic reality as we enter into this discussion tonight. The head of the United States Strategic Command, Admiral Charles Richard, wrote an article that came to attention in the last days in which he said that nuclear war with Russia or China is likely, and therefore we must reshape our nuclear deterrent to make sure that doesn't happen. So here I'm quoting from him, and he said, there is a real possibility that a regional crisis with Russia or China could escalate quickly to a conflict involving nuclear weapons if they perceived a conventional loss would threaten the regime or state. He also said the implications of today's competition and the associated risk of great power crisis or direct armed conflict are profound. They affect nearly every fundamental assumption we make about the use of armed force in the defense of the nation and its allies. Now, we have not heard that kind of talk. Well, although there was some of it there, but it was not the dominant policy outlook, certainly, of the past 4 years. And it has now reemerged. So that's on that side from the United States. On the side of Europe, there's an individual by the name of Joseph Borrell. He's the European Union Foreign Policy Commissioner. And he is on his way to the Moscow trip there. But he was interviewed, and in that interview, he made the statement that the COVID crisis, what we see with the pandemic, marks the beginning of the Asian century. Now, here's his reasoning. He says that the Asian continent has emerged victorious from the crisis because they were able to contain COVID. He says the post-COVID world will be more digital, more Asiatic, and more unequal. That's a quote from him. And he said, where the West were the masters of technologies before COVID, others will be the new masters. Now, mind you, that is a European Union outlook, but it's sort of an expression of a form of collapse that characterizes the transatlantic world. Now, as we've emphasized and continually emphasized, it's British intelligence, the British financial interests, such as that of the City of London, and the British monarchy and crown that are the catalysts for the process that we are undergoing. We, of course, know that from the time of the House of Lords report of 2018, which made it very clear that a second Trump administration was not tolerable from the standpoint of either the British Crown or the House of Lords. And in a recent RT television broadcast, which was on Monday, what happened was that the what's called the FSB, used to be the old Russian KGB, made available a video, and this video showed Russian-British collusion. But in this case, it's not the collusion that they prefer people talk about. In this case, it involved a character by the name of Vladimir Ashurkov, who was the executive director of something called the Anti-Corruption Foundation. And he is the person who is the heading up the organization that is run by this character Navalny, about which you've heard a lot. You know, the person that was supposedly poisoned by Putin, and, you know, that's why all of the protests are going on right now, and this is supposed to be the means by which Putin is to be destabilized. Well, what happened was a video emerged which showed this character Navalny sitting with a person called James William Thomas Ford, the second Secretary for Political Affairs at the United Kingdom's embassy in Russia, at the British Embassy. And basically they had a conversation, and here's some of what was said by the Russian Vladimir Ashurkov to the British intelligence agent. He said, if we had more money, we would expand our team, of course, $10 or $20 million a year. This is not a big amount of money for people who have billions at stake. And that's the message I am trying to project in my fundraising efforts and talking to people in the business community. So what this showed is that the demonstrations and the destabilizations being attempted in Russia, once again, can be shown to directly trace back to Britain and the City of London. Now, the process of this destruction is not actually merely geopolitical. It's actually cultural. And the expression of this that people have heard about or heard the term used is the Green Deal, or sometimes the Green New Deal. We are going to talk tonight about why that's not an appropriate term. Helga Larouche has written an article called "The New Deal for Humanity is Not Green, but Human." And in this, she points out a few things which you want to know. She says, the architects of the Green Deal want that all industrial companies are subject to taxonomy. That is, that their so-called carbon footprint will be recorded. There will be a classification system for ecologically sustainable economic activities, and all private activities will also be subject to the dictates of supposed climate protection. If this green utopia were ever to become a reality, and it cannot because it will lead to chaos beforehand, the extremely inflated prices and taxes will determine exactly the size of the house or apartment in which anybody can live, at what temperature it can be heated, which electrical devices are still allowed, how far you can travel with what means of transport, how often you can eat meat, or whether you can eat meat or exotic fruits at all, and go through some other things. The federal, states, and municipalities in which fossil fuels were previously mined would have massive losses in tax revenues, and jobs will disappear. At the same time, many more landscapes will be spoiled by armies of wind turbines, seas of solar panels, and endless transmission lines. It will require, and none of this will be able to be protected from terrorist attacks. She goes on like that. And the idea is She says, the main problem, however, would be that this green transformation would absorb materials, industrial capacities, and manpower, all of which ultimately represent total waste. That the exit from advanced forms of energy is going to end up not even allowing for this pipe dream to happen, but rather you're going to have massive chaos break out before it can even occur. But before the chaos even breaks out, let me note, the actual danger will be war, including thermonuclear war, because neither Russia nor China can allow for a fully destabilized United States or transatlantic world, for that matter, as you have a spread of the coronavirus. We had in a report today that Dr. Osterholm, some people know about his rather infamous book on viruses, has made the forecast that the next 5 to 8 weeks may be the worst that we've yet seen. He says there will be things perhaps that people have never seen that will occur in this period because of the way in which the various mutations and transmutations are hopping around the United States at this point. And according to another doctor with whom I had a discussion, who's the head of a medical school in Tennessee, he said the problem that you have is that there is not even a search going on for these conditions in the United States. So the point here is that what you're actually in is a situation of galloping, accelerating collapse. All propositions presently that are put forward of a type of, let's say, let's lead some sort of military counter operation or anything like that are not only irresponsible, they'll only make the problem worse. So what are we going to do? How do we handle the problem of actually discussing and formulating how new ideas that actually not only deal with the immediate moment of crisis, not only the immediate decade of crisis, but the Earth's next 50 years? What is the policy for the future that we are able to put forward, and how can we know how that policy will be shaped? So the idea was for our discussion tonight to reflect that process, and to that extent, Jerry Rose is the person that is our presenter. Jerry, are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, excellent. Okay, great.
Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So look, just to begin with some of the ironies, even at the Davos meeting, I mean, Dennis was going through the obvious. But the fact that China was asked to present, in fact was the lead speaker, and that Russia, Putin, was asked to speak as the second lead speaker, indicates the kind of trouble, good trouble, that the Davos reset process is in. First of all, no self-respecting nation on this planet is going to do what Dennis just indicated they would have to do. And China was clear as could be. They maybe mentioned global warming once, maybe, in a minor way at the end. Basically, what President Xi said is we will not implement austerity to achieve any attempt at zero carbon. What we will do is up till 2030, we will use the existing coal and related technologies in order to achieve moderate prosperity. And then by 2050, we will reduce the dependence on coal, which is 60% now, and will increase to 2030 to about 50%, and 15% of their energy will be thermonuclear fission. And then he says by 2060, we will have carbon neutrality. There's only one way that can be done, and that's a breakthrough in fusion. Otherwise, you get the results way before then that Dennis was indicating. So President Xi announced his commitment to his own people and prosperity, as he said, moderate prosperity by 2035, 36, and then prosperity increased to the level of the United States, at least the best of our in the 1960s, 70s, to get to that level of real income, as opposed to the phony stuff that we've got now. And then President Putin warned in no uncertain terms. It was an extremely tough speech, and said we've got to cut the confrontations out. We've got to work together, and you've been reading, if you get our alert service, you've been reading the fact that there has been great progress on the Sputnik 5 vaccine. Many countries who were not to get it from the Western countries have asked Russia to pitch in and help, and asked China to pitch in and help, and they're going to do that. And so at Davos, in the middle of this breakdown crisis, which they call the Great Reset, you had, because China does not have to ask the Bank of England for money. They don't. They don't do central banking. They do national banking. And they are one of the few nations on the planet that actually do Hamiltonian national banking. And they concentrate not just on small business, but their national banking concentrates, as we have extended reports on, and as Liu He, who was their trade negotiator with Donald Trump and his team, had said, we're going to concentrate on massive infrastructure. And they don't have to go begging to the Bank of England for it. They don't have to ask Mark Carney for it. So in an extremely sovereign way, Xi Jinping told Davos, this is what I'll do. And we'll get to carbon neutrality, not on the basis of austerity, but on the basis of scientific discovery and breakthrough. And as you know, the largest fusion effort in the world now is being funded by China. A very aggressive space program in which they've asked several nations, including the United States, to work with them on colonies on the moon, mining He3, which is an excellent fuel for fusion energy. This is what sovereign governments do. One of the problems that President Putin has is he does not have a sovereign credit system. So they have to play in this crazy market. Although there are things which I'm going to discuss that many nations around the world, any self-respecting nation, will move toward a Glass-Steagall arrangement in which the hedge funds and the universal banks, who now have 41 trillion, the top 17 hedge funds and banks have 41 trillion, and it's probably more now. The book I'm referring to was written 4 years ago, so it's probably significantly more now. BlackRock has roughly $5 to $8 trillion. I heard 8 recently. It was 5.7 in the book that I read. So these hedge funds and banks, who took over 50% of the bailouts, their assets were bailed out by 50% or more of the famous COVID money. Majority went to bankrupt stocks and bankrupt companies to bail them out because these hedge funds owned them and they would go under in a bust. So the first thing you would have to do is bankrupt Wall Street and London with a thoroughgoing Glass-Steagall arrangement. And if you don't do that, there's almost nothing that you can do. Secondly, you would have to move from the central banking, which is where the banks are run by Wall Street and London, to impose austerity or IMF conditionalities on countries like Greece, like Italy, and most of Western Europe. Spain is messed up. Germany is just doing it to themselves for other reasons. And you would have to go to national banking, as Franklin Roosevelt did. As Franklin Roosevelt did on Glass-Steagall, to generate the necessary credit with a concentration on infrastructure, on energy, water, hospitals, these kinds of critical infrastructural capabilities, to actually to increase the productivity of labor, starting in the United States and Western Europe, and then getting into Africa and other parts of Asia. But particularly Asia has with China, between China and Japan, in terms of a commitment to national banking, even though Japan is playing all sorts of insane games. They're going to have to do a Glass-Steagall rearrangement and go to national banking. But they still have certain basic energy and infrastructure capabilities in Japan. Obviously, Korea, South Korea has. We don't know what North Korea really has. And in the immediate term, you're going to have to go to methods that are tried and true, that Franklin Roosevelt had in the first day of office declared Wall Street and their banks bankrupt and put them through bankruptcy reorganization. And that's the first day in office. And then later they passed a law called Glass-Steagall, in which under that law and a certain regulatory laws, commercial banks and the deposits in commercial banks would be through the FDIC defended, and every bank that did commercial activities would have to have insurance and pay into the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And they have to pay into that. And all loans in the bank would be guaranteed if they were under commercial management. Investment activities, like these crazy hedge funds and these insane derivative bets and everything else, would not be protected. And up until 1999, they were not protected, although increasingly there were attacks on the Glass-Steagall separation of banks. There's no give anywhere in the world on the question of a Glass-Steagall reorganization. There's also no give anywhere in the world on the question of national banking. And there is no give anywhere in the world on the question of a concentration on increasing the productivity of labor through high technology infrastructure, both in the factories and in the farms, water management, increases in energy flux densities, that the national bank will ensure, or if necessary, make the initial investment in new technologies and let private industry take over those investments and manage it so that the government can get on to more investments in high technology. And then the fourth aspect, which Larouche was uniquely, because Franklin Roosevelt had the first three aspects of this, and these worked brilliantly to get us not just out of a depression, but to prosecute World War II such that at the height of World War II, the United States had become the greatest capacity for machine tools and production the world had ever seen. So let no one argue who is sane on the question of did Franklin Roosevelt's reforms work. They worked to the point of freeing mankind from the scourge of fascism. And at the end of the war, through the Bretton Woods arrangements, again initiated by Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Dexter White and Morgenthau, to reconstruct the world at the end of the war. He had created a gold reserve system that the dollar would be the reserve currency worldwide, pegged to gold, not one-to-one, but to settle up in gold on a Glass-Steagall, on a Bretton Woods arrangement, and that the United States had the machine tool capability and the infrastructure capability through the Marshall Plan, through the Credit-Anstalt für Wiederaufbau in Germany, through certain credit institutions in Japan, through credit institutions throughout the world. Franklin Roosevelt intended that every nation on this planet would go to national banking backed up by the original intention of the International Monetary Fund, and would get the credits minimally through the World Bank, and if more credits were needed to their national banking, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation would make loans through the Exim Bank and other things. And this was the immediate arrangements which brought the world out of hell. that as of 1933, Italy had gone fascist earlier. Germany had gone fascist. By 1941, France had gone fascist. Czechoslovakia was overrun. Poland was overrun. And Franklin Roosevelt and his team took the world out of hell on the principles that Lynn identifies in his 4 laws. And in his Earth's Next 50 Years, Larouche insisted that we don't start innovating immediately, that we go to methods that have been proven to work and work brilliantly. And it really was the London banks, through Richard Nixon and George Shultz, who ended the Bretton Woods system and went to floating exchange rates and increasingly made it impossible for long-term investments, because infrastructure investments, and this is where Lynn develops in the Earth's Next 50 Years, he said you have to look in terms of the payback on massive infrastructure investments at least 2 generations. One generation to absorb the capacity and increase the labor productivity, and the next generation to generate new capacity and new physical principles by which the next 50 years would be secured. In other words, your horizon, if you're competent, is always 50 years or 2 generations. Now, why haven't we done this? This is the big question that Larouche goes at in a very direct way. Why haven't we done this? And Larouche concentrates on the question of classical tragedy. Because it is extremely clear, and if you didn't believe it before that the British Empire is out to destroy the human species, after this report, no one on this planet could say anything different. But we know since 1763 that the British East India Company, after the 7 Years' War, had seized India, and by 1770, India had a famine that killed 10 million people under the direction of the British East India Company. The American patriots saw what they did. And when the British East India said, you're going to pay a stamp act, and you're going to pay taxes for our tea, and you're going to take so much tea, it wasn't the tea that was part of it. It was the understanding the genocidal intention and destruction of human life that the British Empire was committed to. And therefore, we fought a revolution on the basis of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which, as Diane has pointed out in her document that she's writing, the pursuit of happiness is the pursuit of immortality. None of us are going to get out alive in terms of as a beast, as a physical being. But if we leave behind a generation that can generate another generation of greater capacity and depth, and that it be worldwide so that every child who is born has access to the potential of achieving something great personally, or the family is capable of achieving something great for what they participated in, like in World War II, when Franklin Roosevelt said, we're going to build 50,000 planes, which had never even close to been done before. And we did it that year. We invented the machine tools, we invented the capabilities, the discussions on the shop floor were the height of democracy. Because democracy is the capacity to generate new ideas of a necessary quality. So that when we talk about economics, you concentrate, as Franklin Roosevelt did, and said in 1941, in his inaugural address, called the Four Freedoms, he said, as he punctuated each freedom, everywhere in the world. Why? Because fascist tyranny and British imperial power resides on the capacity to destroy the divine spark, to pit each religion against each other, to pit every nation against each other, to pit race, to pit color, to pit creed against each other. And when you have a population that does not have access to a future, that is British imperial policy. And why do we make believe that that is natural? Why do we accept that as reality? And this is where Larouche concentrates on the question of classical tragedy. Because it's never in the great classical tragedies like those of Shakespeare and Schiller, but mainly Shakespeare. It is never an individual who screws up. The problem is that each individual acts out their part in a society that has gone insane, that nobody breaks the mold. Nobody does anything different than what they're expected to do. And in the tragedy in particular that he concentrates on in the Earth's Next 50 Years, he concentrates on the question of Hamlet. And you have a kingdom which, before the play opens, a ghost, the ghost of the previous king, tells the watchman to bring his son. And the famous line, which many of you know if you know the play or have heard, something's rotten in the state of Denmark. Well, the whole state is rotten. Because the king had been killed by Claudius, his brother, to usurp not only him, but to take his wife. Her name was Gertrude. And the ghost stalks the play. And Hamlet, when he is absolutely assured after the play within the play that he sets up to set up Claudius, the murderer of his father, even though the ghost had told him what happened, he sets it up, and Claudius proves through his own actions, Shakespeare's a genius at this, that indeed what the ghost had warned happened. What's the next scene of Hamlet? The insane soliloquy, to be or not to be. In other words, he refuses to face the reality of his situation, even though his mortality is on the line, and he refuses to face his immortality. Look at Dr. Martin Luther King. He knew what was coming. And in his famous speech, which Dennis often indicates for us, he said, longevity has its place. But I'm not fearing any man tonight. I have a dream. Even though he didn't say it in that speech, that's what guided him. A sense of a mission for all mankind. I'm going to read you something from a new book. It's called The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. I have a lot to say about it, but not tonight. But I'm going to read you something about the relationship of Martin Luther King to Franklin Roosevelt. King's idea of the civil rights movement was this: a new deal for everyone in the country. And he said it was called the Economic Bill of Rights, which was where the New Deal left off. And he said the budget he proposed, called the Freedom Budget for all Americans, this is Martin Luther King, an abolition of poverty, guaranteed full employment, fair prices for farmers, fair wages for workers, housing and health care for all, the establishment of progressive tax and fiscal policy that respects the needs of the working family. This economic Bill of Rights that King enunciated as civil rights for all Americans, very reminiscent of Roosevelt's Four Freedoms. The reason Martin Luther King went beyond the civil rights movement to oppose the war in Vietnam, and he told this to Lyndon Johnson: you fight war in Vietnam, there will be no progress or development for anyone in this country and anywhere in the world. And he got a lot of hell for that one. Dennis has often repeated his famous Riverside speech. But he stuck to his guns. And he inspired people. Lyndon LaRouche was raided in 1986 by 400 cops ready to kill him. And he did not back down. And he had convinced Ronald Reagan, we've got to step away from nuclear war and create new energy technologies, and we have to have a beam defense system. And Lynn never flinched from any time ever. Donald Trump often faced those kinds of threats. Xi Jinping fought his way up from a cave in China to become the leader of China in a commitment to bring 800 million people out of poverty. And he did it. Putin, a genius. But as good as all the three are, and as good as Roosevelt was, and the kinds of breakthroughs he made on Glass-Steagall, on national banking, on a concentration on infrastructure, he had to do that. And the defeat of fascism in order to do that. Lyndon LaRouche had made certain fundamental discoveries beyond Franklin Roosevelt, though he appropriated Franklin Roosevelt's he didn't really appropriate. Let me put it another way. He understood the implications of what Franklin Roosevelt has done, but from a completely different standpoint. From a very early age, LaRouche understood, and was later elaborated in his 60, 70 years of elaboration of these ideas, is that the fundamental question between man and beast is that the unique characteristic of man is identified in a very, very early time with the use of fire. The appropriation of technology and the invention of technology and the discovery of universal physical principles that cannot be felt or touched or seen, although its implications can be felt, touched, and seen, like gravity. And that the knowledge of certain fundamental principles and the application of those fundamental principles and the discovery of new principles and the application of those principles are the basis for increases in the relative potential population density per square kilometer of the planet. That we act as a species, as Vernadsky discussed. We act as a species, as a human species with different cultures. And we discover, based upon ironies that are presented in the different language mediums and the different modalities by which these language mediums convey metaphors. And Dennis did a very excellent discussion 2 Thursdays ago of the internal reference point for that, which is why classical music is so important. But as we invent and apply these technologies and these discoveries of principles that cannot be touched or tasted or smelled, though their reflections can be tasted or touched or smelled, like gravity, right? They're not primarily of the senses. They're primarily of a reflection of the laws of the universe. That mankind is a reflection of the self-developing capacity or the anti-entropic capacity of the universe itself. And as we apply those discoveries, as we observe the ironies that shock us into a more profound understanding of the universe, and we apply those like electricity, like other things, then we can shape our institutions to foster those kinds of developments, like Glass-Steagall, like national banking, like Bretton Woods, because your intention is to increase all of mankind's capacity. And as I said, Larouche had a very specific thing, which I'm going to read you, about the dialogue of cultures, that you must have sovereign nations, because sovereign nations have always, from its inception, refused to be ruled by what is called ultramontane or supranational bodies, like this globalization British Empire. The discovery of the nation state from Louis XI to Henry VII to, of course, the great breakthroughs of Franklin, Ben Franklin, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, has always been committed to the commonwealth, to the progress or the general welfare of each individual. And as I told you, in 1941, when Roosevelt said, everywhere in the world, he was referencing the unique capacity as a human species. And I'm going to read you something here from Lynn, from the Earth's Next 50 Years. He's talking about when nations sit down to talk, particularly nations that have the power to break the back of the British Empire. He says, this means, at least implicitly, this sitting down, that the efficiently sovereign nation-state republic should not, and under present world conditions, cannot rely upon its own autonomous will, as the madmen of the U.S. Bush regime have continued to attempt to do. True, sovereignty depends upon the nation's conscious, willful commitment. So the conscious, willful commitment to the common good of all nations and peoples. And he references the Treaty of Westphalia, and he references Franklin Roosevelt. That the difference between the achievements of U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt, who saw his nation's destiny in the future of the whole world, including the freeing of those subjected to colonialism, and the miserable failures of the neo-colonialist immediate successors. Otherwise, with the principles reflected in the Westphalia Treaty, any agreements will degenerate into a sea of heteronomy more or less rapidly if you do not proceed from the commitment to all nations and the common good of all nations and all people, and the science by which you can achieve that in a 50-year, 2-generational cycle. So that's what I got.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. We're going to open up the queue right now.
Q&A session has started. To ask your question, please press *6.
What we're going to be doing, what we're going to be asking you to join us in doing starting right away. over the course of the next days, we will be releasing a process, not merely a piece of literature, but a process of organizing. And it involves a report which will appear in several forms. The tentative title for this report is "The Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elite, the Great Reset." And the idea is for the report to begin to be released. We're looking at it as a pamphlet, a shorter version of a full white paper, internet videos with various of the authors of the report, interviews with various scientists and others. And the idea is that we have to discredit the idea of this Great Reset or Green Deal. We have to stop its implementation. We did a campaign like this about 15 years ago around Social Security, when there was an attempt at that time by the Bush administration to privatize Social Security, and we succeeded in stopping that. So the idea is that this will begin. And we're building on what we had done last year when we wrote a pamphlet called "The World Needs 1.5 Billion New Productive Jobs." So the notion of this thing is that we're going to define a mission for the United States, a mission which in one sense will be very much in evidence next weekend or during the course of the rest of this month as the United Arab Emirates, China, and the United States sort of converge upon the planet Mars. And we'll be next week, that is on next Saturday, 9 days from now, we will, on our Saturday meeting, highlight Lyndon LaRouche's work, particularly around the idea of the 40-year Moon-Mars colonization mission and his famous Woman on Mars television show of 1988. But the idea here is that what we have to do is to take an initiative to give people clarity about something. Let me just reference the fact that 5 years from now, it will be the 250th birthday of the United States. Those of you who recognize the importance of Lexington and Concord, April 18th of 1775, realize that actually that's 4 years away. And the issue is not merely, oh, well, what are we going to celebrate or how are we going to celebrate, anything like that. The issue is to understand what the British imperial intent is, that the United States won't even get to that birthday, not in any recognizable form. And the ways in which we're hearing the various challenges to the Constitution, whether that be let's challenge the Electoral College or let's look at seceding from the United States if we can't get what we want, or for that matter, even looking at things like the filibuster and abolishing the filibuster, so that the concept is that you get a kind of radical democracy rather than a sovereign republic. What we're looking at is a situation in which our best initiative will be to establish a central mission for this country, and that's what we're going to be basically doing. So I wanted to first of all just say that. Now, I did receive one or two text message questions. I guess that's from people from YouTube. Just know that I do not see the chat room. If there's something that needs to be conveyed to me, either get that to me by text message, or if there's some other way that we can receive that, Charles, let me know. I'll go first of all to the phone, and then I'll take one of the text questions. Okay, are you able to hear us?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
1 second. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, this is Jim from Michigan. Jerry, I'd like to raise the ante on what you stated. About 16 years ago, I was invited to a meeting, and I told my friend, look, evil only resides in the minds of men. And he thought about it, and he said, I've got to think about that. And he knew that for a long time I had worked with the Larouche organization, and I had always talked to him and others about what I had learned. Now, here's raising the ante on what you said. There's something wrong, there's something rotten in the state of world affairs. You have the four horsemen of the apocalypse bearing down on us in every way you can think of. You have disease, a collapsing world healthcare system. You have famine. You have food cartels controlling the ebbs and flows of what will get produced and how it will be shared and how much it will cost. You have pestilence. You have a world banking system that is really about monetarism. And then you have war constantly going on. Now, in order to defeat all this, you do need to go through Lynn's writings, such as The Science of a Christian Economy, so you wish to learn about economics and what you said about the Earth's next 50 years, and capitalism and its law. Now, in order to break all this down, people have to get into Lynn's writings like this. And in order to defeat the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the only thing that can be done at this given moment is for people to focus on Lynn's four laws, and that will defeat all four horsemen of the apocalypse. So that's what I wanted to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You're absolutely right.
Okay, very good. So I have a question from Greg, who could not call in. He wanted to do this by text. It says, we are in the midst of a critical thinking phase change. We are extremely close to reaching critical mass, demonstrated by the American citizens' unquestionable appetite for artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and conformity/adjustment. Due to the deconstruction of words, ideas are lost, and the general population is governed by the Hobbesian notion of each against all. That is that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, at least until I am able to overpower them. And he does say we have to immediately begin to create a new generation of the culture of hope. And he's asking basically for you to comment on this.
Well, I've discussed this. First of all, that description is the increasingly dominant characteristic of Western Europe and large sections of the United States. That is not what you would describe in China, in Asia, although they have their weirdness too. The real question, and this is where, remember, President Trump won the election. Let's face reality on this. He won the election, which means there's still a majority of people who don't want war and who want a future. There is a majority of people who still want that. Now the problem, and we've got to be very straightforward about this, and this is where the question of classical tragedy comes in. We accept there's a money system, that the banks are untouchable, that this money system is wealth, that all I need is the money, and the majority of people accept that the British Empire, which is knowable, how could you not know it? In other words, that's willful not to know. I mean, with Steele, who ran the operation on the inside, with Halligan, with the things that we've put out over the years. And now the Navalny affair, the unbelievable insanity of this bailout system is the British Empire. Larouche has this very important image, very funny image, in the Earth's next 50 years. And it comes in the context of the tragedy. you have a newlywed in their first night of marriage. There's an elephant in the bed defecating all over them, and they refuse to notice it. You know, that's what the British Empire is. You know, I had a thought, if anybody's a good cartoonist here, you would have an elephant in a bed defecating on a woman who's the Democratic Party, a male who's the Republican Party, defecating all over them, and the top caption would be duopoly. The elephant would be labeled the British Empire and the central banks, and one of the participants is saying, "Oh my God, it's green." But that's the reality of it. People refuse to recognize the reality of their situation. They shrink from it in the way that Hamlet shrank from looking at the reality of his situation. Yes, it is awesome. But look at what Joan of Arc did to save her nation. And she did. I can go through the story, I know it quite well. Right? Look what Martin Luther King did to inspire a generation, and still inspires them today. Look at what Lyndon LaRouche did. They never got him, but they tried. Right? We have to stop. We have to face the reality and name the names of the British Empire, the central banking. We have to absolutely be clear of who's doing this to us. Until you can say that clearly and understand that clearly, and I assure you, privately, because of what Lyndon LaRouche did through his whole life, you know, Dennis and Harley discussed this very well on the question of Lyndon LaRouche being the shadow president since 1971. He was the shadow president. And he, through meeting with world leaders, intensive discussions with the scientific establishment of Russia, the scientific establishment of China, the scientific establishment of the United States, and the intelligence establishment of the United States, is a relative competence, which is why we haven't fallen into the sewer by now. There is resistance. And Donald Trump represented that as part of a combination with Lynn. And frankly, it would be very good if he said that. You want to freak out the British Empire? You really want to do something that'll bring them down? Because ironically, President Trump is closer to Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon LaRouche than any damn Republican who ever lived. That's a fact.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the
commitment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you finished? I'm sorry. I didn't mean
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. Great. Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is Jose Vega here in the Bronx. First of all, Jerry, I want to say thank you, because every time you get on and you always bring Shakespeare in it, it always opens my mind, because it always reminds me that we have to think in a poetic kind of way and in a truly classical way. I was in a discussion last night where I couldn't even bring up topics about the world or about the threat of thermonuclear war or about the famine of Africa, because people these people were too concerned about themselves. And they tried to justify themselves by saying, well, I'm unable to do anything because I don't have the power to do anything. Or I'm just somebody, I'm a nobody that's here in the Bronx. Or I'm not a congressman, I'm not a senator, I'm not a president. I have no power. Therefore, it's not my fault the world is the way it is. And even if I could do something, people are just the way they are, and that's despicable. They're corruptible, they're dirty, and they're evil, and human beings are just generally bad. And so, you have to forgive me if I have a very cynical view of humanity. And I wanted to know what you thought about that. What do you, how would you...
Jose, how many people were in the conversation?
Six people were in the conversation.
And we presumed that all of these people were young people?
Oh, yes. They were all my age. They were all exactly 22. Some of them, four of them were in college, and two of them were not. Yeah.
Well, they are the problem. Exactly on the level of the Hamlet. That's how you lose a civilization. Because they're unwilling to think outside the box. And you have to challenge with irony. I'm not saying how to do it, but you have to say, I bet you think money is wealth. You can't just go at it. You'll lose. Particularly in a one-on-one or a six-on-one or whatever. Right? And focus their attention on an irony of something they believe. And begin to present without flinching a critical irony. This is why language and music and poetry are so important. And Larouche's understanding of economics is all of them together. And you've got to, in a polemical but light way, challenge what you know to be their assumptions. I'm not guaranteeing a result, but I'm guaranteeing that's the only way. Luckily, and we're getting into with this COVID situation, I told Dennis and Diane a couple of days ago, I'm just so impressed with Jocelyn Elders. Look, we now have spent close to $7 trillion on the so-called bailout on the COVID question, right? Could we not have taken a couple of $100 billion and done a CCC-style effort to bring young people into the process of fighting COVID, which is what Jocelyn said? Teaching basic health requirements, basic stuff. This is the kind of, because I'll tell you what happened in Cuba, and I was telling this to Diane, when Castro came in, the first year, he closed down every high school. He sent every high school student in Cuba to every little village in Cuba to teach literacy. They had a book. They had a challenge. Some of them did brilliantly. And within a 2-year period, Cuba was 90% literate. The resulting characteristic is that these high school students went back to school and many of them became teachers because they had such a good experience. And many of them understood what it meant to be human and how important they really are. I think we're going to have to kick some ass. I don't think we should sit around and watch this stuff go down. That's the kind of thing around Diane's campaign. It's the kind of thing that we can do and should do. We damn well need it. And a lot of young people will get inspired, and maybe they will go to other countries and help set up healthcare systems and CCC, or go on with government funding to go to college. We need a lot more doctors. We have to cut the crap out that money is wealth. So these are the kinds of things that we can challenge people to do and challenge government to do. We can't sit around and watch this thing happen. We've got to scare the crap. And there are 75 million people with us. They ain't so happy about what happened. So let's not fall into anything but irony and challenges.
Okay, very good. I'm going to go back to the phones. We do have another couple of text questions, but there's several people now in the queue, so let's go to that. Okay, are you able to hear us?
Hi, can I be heard?
Yes.
Hi. Hi, Dennis. This is Jacob in New Jersey. My question today is, what does the first 2 weeks plus of the Biden regime tell us about how the Democrats view job creation and space science? And also, are we pushing forward to Mars, or are we just going to make more bombs?
Well, as I said, there's a tremendous irony involved here. I mean, we know what Biden is. Let's have no illusions about what Joe Biden is. He's a corrupt sophist who took money from everybody, Nazis in Ukraine, crazy corrupt guys in Israel. This guy's just a corrupt SOB. Now, Democrats, and this is what I think we have to think about here. Remember, Franklin Roosevelt was a Democrat. Now, previous to Franklin Roosevelt, the Democratic Party was the party of slavery. That's a fact. But with Franklin Roosevelt and his team and what they managed to do to bring mankind out of a fascist hellhole, it represents a method by which you can defeat a depression, which is getting worse and worse by the day, and the oligarchy which imposes the depression on people. We saw it with Franklin Roosevelt. When he stepped in, he told Jess Jones, the Reconstruction Finance guy, he said, Jess, first he closed down all the banks and reorganized them. Bankruptcy reorganization. That happened. That's not just an abstraction. That happened. And then by the first 100 days, they had a law about separating speculation from physical reality, commercial banking, called Glass-Steagall. Then he told Jess Jones, hey, look, if Wall Street won't lend and it's a decent project, you lend. And we will create the credit by which the Reconstruction Finance Corporation could lend. They took up farmers' mortgages. They took up creating price supports for farmers. They took up all sorts of critical things such that the general welfare was the ongoing intention of a national banking effort. Now, there are a number of Democrats who got hoodwinked on this insane thing around Trump. They were hoodwinked. and too cowardly, frankly. But there is a section of the Democratic Party which we can reach and bring them into combination with people who are prepared to defend the general welfare and bring the critical four laws of Lynn and Franklin Roosevelt to bear. And the fourth law is uniquely Lynn's on the question of Vernadsky and this scientific discovery. But this can be done. Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know if people listen to Diane's discussion on Friday nights, but I didn't know anything about Tulsi when I said, look, there's outside of Tulsi Gabbard, there's nobody against war in either party, right? Except Trump and, whatever he's been able to organize. The next day, Tulsi Gabbard was on Fox saying we got to cut the war, we got to cut out these large internet firms from telling us what to do. She's also agrees on Glass-Steagall. There are also civil rights leaders who we can move into this thing, particularly around what Jocelyn Elders is saying. Do people really want to bail out BlackRock with $5-point-something or $8 trillion? Do they really want to do that? Do they really want to do what Dennis just identified what would happen? No, they do not. But we've got to have the courage and the resoluteness to work together to get this job done. And with the direction that we're giving now, we can blow this thing sky high. We can. But we got to work hard. We can't doubt ourselves. That's the reality of the situation. We have to make it happen, and we can. But you can't pull any Hamlet. You don't have any downtime. You really got to be inspired by people like Martin Luther King, Lyndon LaRouche, Joan of Arc. That's real. That's real. That's how history is made. That's how we became a republic. That's how we maintained the republic. So that's what.
Thank you, sir.
That's right. To make real change, you got to break some eggs, but you don't want to be an omelet. Okay, so we're going to go back to the phones. Here we go. Yeah, can you hear us? Hello? I think you're muted.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, great.
Hello?
Yes,
I
now
can
we
hear
hear
you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, this is Marie Walsh.
Great.
Are you with me?
Yes, we're listening.
I don't think she can hear us.
Okay. Okay, and I have a question. Is it because Trump lost the presidency that all this mess is happening? Hello?
Did you hear her, Jerry? She's asking, is it because that Trump lost the presidency that all of this is happening?
No, it's the other way around. All this happened, and that's why Trump, he didn't lose the presidency. He won the presidency. The votes never got counted. It's the other way around. He opposed, as you know, the climate change. He opposed the wars. He opposed the globalization. The British Empire, London, Wall Street went ape. The British lords said, we will do everything in our power to ensure that he doesn't get a second term, because that would be our end. So the battle is by no means over. It's by no means over. It's by no means over, not even close. And we have the majority of the people if we've got the guts. That's the truth. But you got to learn. Can't make the same mistake twice. You got to name names. And we got to take back the country. And this green fascist game they're playing, they're very vulnerable. Most nations, most people on the planet are not willing to die for Fink, the head of BlackRock, or that Jamie Dimon, who I personally think is a disgusting pig, or Walter, or this crazy Biden, or this lunatic Schumer. And I'm not even going to get into Nancy Pelosi. Most people are not prepared to die for them. And that's what they're demanding. They'll find out soon enough. And that's where we come in. Competent leadership. We've got to hit the Glass-Steagall thing. These guys have got to be bankrupted. Take their power. We've got to create credit institutions. Paul Gallagher thinks we can federalize the Federal Reserve and fund fusion and fund particularly the science driver policies for space. We can blow this thing sky high, but we got to know what we're doing. We got to use previous precedent and some honest discovery, and then we have to think and be inspired by 2 generations to come. And we'll about get it right. But we can't pull any Hamlet. You can't say, oh, to be or not to be. That is the question. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. And Shakespeare knew it was nonsense. In fact, the ghost knew it was nonsense of his father. So that's our job.
Okay, very good. Okay, we're going to go back to the phones again, then I'm going to go to the texted question. All right, are you able to hear us?
Hello, this is Sid Hill in Alaska. I was wondering when we're going to put the mustache on Biden.
That's a good idea. I like it.
I'm also running for U.S. Senate.
It would definitely fit. Let me put it this way. It would definitely fit.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good idea. I'll recommend it. I will definitely recommend it because it just references the Obama thing perfectly. That's good. I like it.
I don't know if you heard me. I said I'm also running against Lisa Murkowski for United States Senate.
Great. Hey, wow. Wonderful. How long have you been with Larouche? I just don't recognize your name.
20 years.
Yeah.
Longer, actually.
Good
25.
job. Good job. Have you talked to Diane yet?
No.
Diane. Okay, well, you should coordinate with her. Good job. I'm glad you're doing it.
I stood out here for 6 years with LaRouche's banner. LaRouche says impeach Obama now with the mustache.
Good for you.
And got a lot of support. And I have a lot of support.
That's wonderful.
Asking me to run for Senate. So
that makes me happy. Good work.
Good work on you guys, too. Bye.
Great. Thanks. Okay, now let me go to this. This is basically a report, Jerry. There's a woman, she's a commentator, Katie Halper. She's on with Matt Taibbi. They do a show called Useful Idiots. And
good name.
She had this to say. She had this thing about Biden. The Democratic Party has announced their big, they have big announcement. They're going to give people $1,400, right? So what she said is, okay, now first of all, this is supposed to be $2,000. But the real reason they're announcing the $1,400 is because they expect that when they go into negotiations with the Republicans will give them less. And that way they can look good by giving people $800. So
oh man!
She had another person on comment.
I'm sure it's true. I'm sure.
The other person, they're just talking about how the left is very weak. Both of these people are Bernie Sanders people, basically. They say that, right? And the other person said that they would never vote for a Democrat again. The left is weak. They really don't care what we think, etc. And then went on to just say that it's already the case that they expected that the Democratic Party would lose the 2022 elections. So the person, this is a person from down in the Alabama area, is asking what you think about the, this picture and what can be expected.
Yeah, I look. The problem. Let me take 10 minutes to give you a sense of this because it's important. In this new book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, the guy is a romantic, though he does understand that Henry Wallace, who was the heir apparent to Franklin Roosevelt after he died, and was the Secretary of the Commerce, had proposed full employment, 60 million jobs, in a pamphlet. In 1945, when the men were coming home and we were demobilizing, and we had to put 15 million people immediately back to work, and with the people we were laying off from the war production plant and the war production, we had to reorganize the economy to build housing, to build schools, all of which was not done during the war, to build hospitals along the lines of Hill-Burton. Wallace had proposed all this. And with Franklin Roosevelt's support, but Roosevelt died. He also proposed that we go for nuclear energy. This was Henry Wallace. He also proposed that he was very staunchly against war, and he smelled what Harry Truman was up to with this Churchill business, that they were going to start a Cold War, start military production again, and not do a damn thing for Latin America or Asia or Africa. He smelled it, and he called it. Henry Wallace did. Now, in 1944, Henry Wallace, who was Eleanor Roosevelt's favorite, and Franklin Roosevelt's favorite, was going to, could have been the vice president of the United States when Franklin Roosevelt ran for his fourth term. And the real Southern racist lunatics in the party, who were Farley and others, who were, very well entrenched in the party, insisted that Wallace not be nominated, and they did every trick in the book to make sure Wallace was not nominated. And then, and I was telling Dennis this is shocking but true. When Truman, after Roosevelt died, Truman ran a Red Scare against Henry Wallace, against Harry Dexter White, along with Hoover. In 1948, it wasn't until 1950 that Joe McCarthy got into the act. Now, in a book by Clark Clifford, which is identified by this John Nichols, who wrote this book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, Clark Clifford, who was very close to Truman. Truman said, I know there's no communist conspiracy, but I got to get the party in line. He had to wipe out the New Deal people, who they call the left. Frankly, they were the American system people. So the whole Red Scare was understood by Truman as a fraud. There was no danger of a communist revolution inside the United States. Not even close. And in fact, Larouche said, had the Bretton Woods system remained in place with its commitment to credit for the Soviet Union, to credit for China, to credit for Africa, to rebuild a war-torn world, that Lyndon LaRouche was absolutely convinced that if Stalin got out of line under a Bretton Woods American system approach throughout the world, he would not have gotten very far. But the very abandonment of any development and any credit for Russia, for China, for Africa, for Latin America, no credit, created a world fraught with danger and fraught with potential for war. The lack of implementation of the American system worldwide under Henry Wallace, who was the heir apparent to Roosevelt, that's what caused the danger, and to this day causes the danger of war, a very real danger of war. We have to go back to Glass-Steagall, national banking, national concentration on real infrastructure and productivity, and real science. We don't have a choice. And whoever comes along, remember, a lot of the Trump support came from the Democratic Party, who was so disgusted with this identity politics that they just said, forget it. And they went with George Wallace. You know? They went with George Wallace. They went with Donald Trump. You know? They went with Ross Perot. What has been done to them, the lying that has been done to them, the lack of real development that has occurred in this country, no, they want us. And they want a combination. And with Trump people, with Tulsi's people, with people like Matt Taibbi, others, you'd be surprised what we could put together. And we get this country and the world moving again. We can do it. They're weak. Yeah, they had what's called a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic, meaning they shot their wad, and now they're totally vulnerable.
Okay, we'll go back to the phones. Okay, can you hear us? Hello.
Hello. Good evening, Jerry Dennis, Daniel, New York. Mr. Yakov Kadmi is Israeli former chief of Army Secret Service. He said something which caught my eye. He said Putin is strong and they cannot get him somehow militarily, so they try to get in from inside. And you see, but he said, you see his National Guard, the young people, young men, they marching on these parades, and they look and how all of them, they are smiling. Look very carefully at their smiles. Right. He's concerning about smiles. And he continues. He said, so Pentagon planners, you think he's talking, he's thinking. You see that? You see these people. It's interesting. I was also impressed with the Putin speech at Davos. So
it was.
Like to comment on that, Jerry, if you want.
Look, it was impressive. Unlike Hamlet, he faced the reality of what he's dealing with here, and he knows the names, by the way. Better than we do.
He
knows it by name. He knows it by name, and he probably, as the head of the KGB in Germany, dealt with some of these guys in ways that you and I would not.
He first said the surname,
but
Sharp, and after he continues and his name, he said that first name. It's interesting from Putin that he's you need to study that and you see this every word. So I was really get me attention at that what he said. That's really very important, right? In this grade.
Well, it was extremely important. He said, "Look, either we stop the game, okay," and he meant it. He said he referenced World War II. He referenced Nazis. Okay, he said it. He said, you either stop these games or this thing could get out of control. And he was warning the British, I assure you. Okay? He's not a Hamlet. Xi Jinping is not a Hamlet. Donald Trump is not a Hamlet. Helga Zepp Larouche is not a Hamlet. These guys are in trouble. There's a lot of Hamlets in the Democratic Party, and God knows Polonius is in the damn Republican Party. I mean, that's the truth. So the reason people are smiling is they have a guy who will defend them.
Oh.
And you look at the science, this Sputnik thing that they pulled on the vaccine, very impressive.
Yeah.
And a number of countries are ordering the vaccine, right?
Yes.
A number of countries. They did a good job on that. They did a good job on the hypersonic missiles. They're doing their science establishment is coming back strong. So with them, a decent United States committed to mankind and the future under American system laws, with Xi Jinping, Russia, ourselves, India can be brought along, Japan can be brought along. We can do it. And the principles are well known. That's why I elaborated them in this Earth's Next 50-year thing. The principles are well known, and we can do it. But he's tough. He's tough. He's fair, he's tough, he's funny, and he doesn't frighten. And he told it like it was.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, Roger Calvin, Baltimore. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
I was looking at a book recently, published in 1984 by a young lady. It was called The Hitler Book. And
hey, there's a lot of funny people on the call tonight, Dennis. What was her name again?
Roger Calvin.
No, her name. Who wrote the book?
Her name? I did not say that yet. But starting about, I found it fascinating. Starting about page 115 up through about 125, if people want to understand what the Biden administration, what the British Empire, what the oligarchs are doing at this moment, read those 20 pages, because it's a.
Could you repeat that again? Repeat those pages again.
Yeah, pages about 115 up to about 125. 121 is kind of the jackpot, but it's exactly the same process that they're using today, that they used to bring the entire World War II into operation. Bring Hitler in to ensure that would happen. It was planned. Now, so if people are a little confused of the enemy we're fighting, there was a very tiny clique of people that were doing this. There were, people that, got out of bed and put on their hoods and put on their, their horse blanket and went out, into the critter world as we do the human world. And, it's very easy to understand what we're up against because we're up against a bunch of critters. But they had this plan, and it's just another replication of how they operate. And it's very, well condensed right in those pages. And so our plan, which our process of, and I'm sure Xi Jinping, Putin, all these people have read this and they understand what's going on because of what Hilda Larouche wrote back in 1984. So, they will do their damnedest to counter that, but they need a lot of support by the American population because we're the people that should be leading this fight, should have been leading this fight since before the assassination of Kennedy, and it will give anybody a good sense of what's going on in the world right now, and just clear up a lot of ideas or a lot of misconceptions or wondering why, you, Hilga, everybody, Dennis understands what we're up against and how to pull, you might say, some strings to stop it. So, but the strings, are not just strings. We got to bring, some ropes in to pull the people into, understanding this whole thing of Hamilton LaRouche and what the wonderful future we can build. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay. What I'm going to do is this. We are coming up on time here, so I'm going to have to, let's see, I think we're just going to take one more question. Let me see where we at. Yeah, hello. Can you hear us?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Bill Jenkins, Leesburg. I see you guys are having a lot of fun. You see, you left me in there.
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing, Jerry?
Yeah.
Okay. You guys are having too much fun. And you left me here. Oh, hell yeah. You left me here in this galaxy when nothing seems to be going on. But that's all right. Because, hey, I can lead, I can follow. It doesn't make any difference. It's just that every once in a while, you guys let me know something. But I might run up to New York and you guys know with the boss.
Well, let's do it like this. Let's do it like this. I actually want to say something here to everybody because of the lateness of the hour, but also because of the lateness of the hour in another sense. Okay. When we get this report, which everybody's going to see, it'll be out, as we say, over the weekend. You can go to the websites and check it out. We want you to begin to distribute this. Well, first, read the report. On Saturday, we will have Richard Freeman and Mike Billington, who were two of the authors of the report. This is now The Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elites, The Great Reset. So that's the tentative name for the report. And so, like we said, we're going to put it out in various forms. So there'll be video, there'll be also the written pamphlet, short pamphlet, and then the longer white paper. But what's important here is that we've got to completely disrupt what is supposedly a $40 trillion process. Now, there's a lot of beliefs that this thing will stay in place, but actually, as we've often proven in our history, it's a lot easier to disrupt the process than to build a process. We're very good, actually, at taking something like this down and taking it apart, but we need a lot of help. Also, because what they're talking about doing is going to make them instantaneously unpopular, as the reporter who was talking to us about this Katie Halpert thing commented. There's already, in other words, talk around the people that, well, the way he put it was somebody apparently one of these people wasn't a helper, said, I miss Trump. I already miss Trump. They hate Trump, right? Said, but you knew who to hate. At least you could hate somebody. Here, you have sort of really everybody sort of equally. I think they're sort of blocked on that. But what I think is important is that there is no. It's a moment that we're in of extraordinary, not merely weakness, but volatility in the American population. In other words, if somebody stands up right now and leads a fight, people will get into the fight. So I just wanted to make that clear to everybody that's on, and I think that's the best way to get to know what's happening. Get in the fight. So Jerry, I'm going to close this out at this point. So if you've got some final words you'd like to say.
No, as usual, I thought it's an excellent discussion. I thought it was good. That's all.
All right. So I'm going to ask that people do the following. On Saturday, that's in just 2 days, get other people. We're trying to build our platform for the Larouche organization. If you've got time and you can volunteer, this is very important. Get in touch with one of our organizers, because you can get on the phone and help us literally just get more subscribers to the web platform. In addition to helping us with the distribution, of course, there's always contributions that we need, financial contributions, and the alert service, as well as the EIR magazine, to which people should subscribe. Finally, we had somebody call in before who was talking about running for the United States Senate. Diane Sayre running as a candidate for the United States Senate against Chuck Schumer, senator from Wall Street. This is a national campaign, an independent campaign that we want to have people support in many different ways. Diane's going to be doing a program tomorrow night. It's called New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. It's a weekly broadcast. It happens at 8 p.m. And if you put in, I guess, Sayre for the number 4 Senate, I think that will come up. If you want to be to tune into that tomorrow night, or if there are people that should have been on tonight that you think should have heard tonight, tell them about tomorrow night. So you've got Friday night, New York Symposium with Diane Sayre, and you've got the 2 o'clock the Larouche Manhattan Town Meeting. So join us there and help us by getting to work. Again, by the way, one last thing, we are also now putting out electronic leaflets which feature certain portions of what it is that we're discussing on these calls. And we also need people to help us with distribution with that. So I guess the only thing I'd like to say in closing is that we're in a circumstance in this country right now where it's possible to create a far broader, I won't call it a coalition, a united front among people who believe that they are completely divergent in their political views. Because there's something above your so-called political view. It's your view of what human beings are, of what humanity is. And you change or you can transform your political views based on that conception of humanity that also evolves on your part. I think what was important about what Jerry said about the idea of the multiple ironies that are posed by the differences in culture, that rather than those differences being something that people should be fearful of, it's by those differences that we are actually able to develop. And I think that's an important thing to think about in terms of what we should be doing and have to do right now in this country. Clearly, we all know that whether it be YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, there's a big war right now on the question of what you can say and what you can think. And it's important for us to insist that we are going to not merely think those things we are told not to think, but more importantly, we're going to solve the problems we're told we can't solve. And that's what this organization has always been dedicated to. That's what Lyndon LaRouche dedicated his both life and his work to. And it's that ability to solve the problems we are told we are not permitted to solve that will preserve, protect, defend, and improve this republic. So on behalf of the LaRouche organization, I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. and we'll see you either tomorrow night or Saturday or this time next week.
This session is no longer being recorded. Goodbye.